Now, casting is when you change from one data type to another. So we've obviously seen in our video so far that strings and integers, if you pick the wrong one, it can change the effect it'll have on maths. Now, if you do ever take the wrong data, it's very easy to change it. An example from earlier is I was asking people to enter their age. So if I ask someone to enter their age, because this is an input, the result is always going to be a string. So if I print type age, even if they enter a number, it says it's a string. So we know that any input that gets entered is going to be stored as a string. If I'm asking a user for an input that I need to be stored as a number, I need to write int, which is what I want to turn it to an int for integer. And then I encapsulate whatever it is I want to turn into the integer in brackets. So I'm going to say int, please enter your input, which we know is going to be a string, and I run it. So if I then do the same thing, and you can see now it's an integer. So if that looks confusing because I'm encapsulating the input, which is something you'll end up commonly doing, it's the same as if I'd done something like age equals int of age. So if I'd done that underneath, so I've said the new age is now becoming, so remember you can change what's in a variable, so the variable age is now becoming an integer version of whatever was in age. This will accomplish exactly the same task. And if that makes more sense at this moment in your brain, that's an absolutely fine approach to doing it. So that's a way of casting. The only thing to go through really is your different options. So you've got int, you've also got str, you've got bool if you want to turn something into a boolean, and you've got float, which you write the full name float. So if I do str and I do it the opposite way, so I'll keep the int there, so we know at this point, if I print the type there, at that point when I run it, so on line 2 I'm taking it in, it's becoming an integer, so it's printing out it's an integer, and then on line 5 I'm changing that integer to a string, and then I'm printing out and it's a string. So it's very easy to change between them, and again I could do a float here, so I'll change that integer to a float. I'll press run, and you can see the first one changed it to a float, and then I'm changing it back to a string, and I'm printing out and it's a string. So again, if I print it out there instead of printing out the type, you should see the decimal place retained, even though it's a string, because I typed in 33, it then changed it to a float here, so it became 33.0. I print out the type and it says it's a float. I then convert that float to a string, and then I print it out and it's a string. So although that looks like a number, I can't do maths on that. So if I do +4 at the end, when I press run, I'm going to get an error. Okay, and if we read the error, it says can only concatenate strings to strings. So I can only concatenate, which means join, which is this thing. I can only concatenate a string to another string, not an integer. So it shows me I've got a data type problem. So I can fix that if I wanted to add 4 to the age that's coming in. So let's go back a bit. So I want to take in a float. I'll leave it as a float. I'm not going to change it. Don't even need to print out the type. So we know that's going to be a float. And then I add 4 to it. That's going to be, so I'll do 44. If I then add 4 to that is 48. The reason it's got the the reason it's got the 0.01 is because I converted it to a float, which is obviously decimal places. If I'd converted it to an integer, so remember this input is the string, so that's 44 effectively with speech marks around it. Convert it to an integer would get rid of the speech marks, and then I add 4 to it and it will be 48 without the decimal place because it's never been a float. Okay, So that's casting. So again, it's relatively straightforward, but you're going to use it quite a lot when you need to change the data types of little bits of data depending on what you're doing with it. So you can store things as strings and change them just at the time you need to do the mathematics and then store it back again. But it's also a common error you're going to see. So like I said before, if I just take that normally, like that, enter your age, and then I try and do some maths with it, it's going to say the same error we got before, can only concatenate string, not integer, to string. Because I've got an integer there, and I'm trying to join it to a string, and the computer doesn't understand. How do you join a word to a number? So that's casting. We'll use that quite a lot, and if you ever hear me refer to the term casting, that just means I'm changing the data from one type to another.